One common objection to Christianity made by some in the West is an appeal to the religious demographics throughout the world. Proponents of this line of reasoning often will say that you're just a Christian because you were born here in America, where the dominant religion is Christianity. If you were born in China, you'd be a Buddhist. While this silly Reddit tier argument isn't the most intelligent objection because it doesn't actually deal with any of the arguments or evidence for Christianity, it is nonetheless rhetorically powerful among many online. However, it also creates an opportunity for Christian apologists to compare and contrast Christianity with other worldviews. Oftentimes, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity get labeled quote-unquote Abrahamic faiths because they are all descendants of the patriarch Abraham, inherit some of the same holy texts, and believe in a supreme transcendent God. There is also a narrative which exists that claims all three of these religions identify and worship the same God. But my goal by the end of this discussion is to debunk this goofy perennialist propaganda. Let's begin by taking a look at Islam. As the world's fastest growing religion, the claims of Islam should be taken with some degree of seriousness. Muhammad, the final prophet, is obviously a major figure within Islam. According to their tradition, Muhammad heard a voice while atop a mountain, or in a cave depending on the source. He initially believed this voice to be a demon because it filled him with dread, and when he didn't hear it, he wanted to kill himself. His wife, however, convinced him otherwise. So he went back and conversed with this entity who called himself the Archangel Gabriel. Muhammad returns home and dictates to the scribes what he had heard from this entity, and thus, the Islamic religion is born. To briefly qualify a few terms that I'll be using here, the Quran is the Muslim equivalent to the Bible for all intensive purposes. It is their holy text. The Surah are chapters within the Quran. The Hadith are written volumes of tradition about the life of Muhammad. They function somewhat like the Church Fathers for Christians in that they offer an interpretive lens for the Quran. Jihad is a term that refers to the effort a Muslim exerts. Greater jihad is spiritual battle, while lesser jihad is earthly military battle. Allah is the Arabic word for God. It is not, however, specific to the Islamic conception of God. I will argue, however, that Muslims do have a very different conception of this God, even though we may use the same word to refer to this being. So let's discuss some of the scripture of Islam, also known as the religion of peace. According to the Quran, Surah 62, verse 6 says, quote, "O you who are Jews, if you think that you are the favorites of Allah to the exclusion of other peoples, then invoke death if you are truthful." Surah 551 states, quote, "Do not take Jews and Christians for friends. Surely Allah does not guide such unjust people." Surah 930 says, quote, "Christians say, the Messiah is the son of Allah. May Allah destroy them." Surah 929 states, quote, "Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth. From among the people of the book," this refers to Jews and Christians, "until they pay the jizya, a tax, with willing submission, and feel themselves subdued." And let's not forget the infamous Surah 9:5, which states, quote, "Slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them captive, and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush." As one can tell, Islam truly lives up to its claim of being the religion of peace, and this is manifested in the numerous wars Islam has waged throughout history against Christians and Jews, just as its sacred texts prescribe. As mentioned previously, Islam claims that Jesus was not actually crucified, but that he ascended into heaven without dying. According to Surah chapter 4, verses 157 through 158, quote, "They did not kill nor crucify him, but another was made to resemble him. Allah raised himself to himself." Historical evidence, on the other hand, demonstrates rather conclusively that Jesus really was crucified. Without belaboring the point or repeating myself, whether one is Christian, Jewish, or pagan, all of the historical records attest to Jesus being crucified. In the modern day, only Muslims and Jesus mythicists insist that Jesus was not crucified. to which they would need some extraordinary evidence to overturn the clearly unbiased consensus view that Jesus was crucified. What likely happened, however, is that the early Muslims got this idea from local heretical Christian sects who believed that Jesus did not die by crucifixion, such as the Docetists, Gnostics, and certain monophysites. Islam also claims that the Bible was corrupted over time, though, as I've discussed previously, this would have been impossible. The scriptures weren't dictated from one singular source in the way Muslims and maybe some Protestants assume. Rather, there existed a multiplicity of manuscripts in various locations. At best, this so-called corruption theory would present differing manuscripts, but alas, 94% of the manuscripts we have match up with each other. So unfortunately for Muslims, this theory has some major problems. Islam also gets various details about Christianity flat out wrong. It claims that the Trinity consists of Allah, Jesus, and Mary, rather than the Holy Spirit. The Quran itself confuses Mary, the mother of Jesus, with Miriam, the sister of Aaron and Moses. Surah 19, verses 27 through 28, calls Mary the sister of Aaron. In Surah 66:12, she is called, quote, the daughter of Imran. Imran is actually the father of Miriam. Mary's parents are Joachim and Anna. In Surah 3:35 through 36, it states that the wife of Imran bears a girl and names her Mary. In reality, Imran's children are Miriam, Moses, and Aaron. Muslims also revere Jesus and believe he will return at the end of days, but they do not believe him to be the divine Son of God. Instead, they believe he was merely a prophet. The Quran itself plagiarizes heretical Christian texts, such as the infancy Gospel of Thomas, which is where it steals the story of Jesus giving life to some sparrows out of clay. It theologically doesn't make sense for the Quran to appropriate this text. The infancy Gospel of Thomas, while a heretical Christian text, still views Jesus as divine. This is why he can create life. But in Islam, Jesus is not considered divine, so why is this story included in the Quran? The Quran also plagiarizes the Syriac infancy gospel in Surah 19:30, which pulls the narrative of Jesus miraculously speaking as an infant. Islam even imports the virgin birth of Jesus from Christianity, but in Christianity, it is a miracle which demonstrates Jesus' divine origin. Again, in Islam, Jesus is not considered divine, so why include this detail which goes against Muslim theology? Islam does not apply this logic to any other prophet, only to Jesus. It also doesn't make much sense why Jesus is considered a prophet to Muslims, because in their conception, he didn't really do anything, except, as the Jews believe, deceive people. It is also completely incoherent how early on the Quran praises Jews and Christians, like in Surah 5:47, quote, let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. Meanwhile, just a few chapters later, in passages like Surah 9:30, it says things like, quote, Christians say, the Messiah is the son of Allah. May Allah destroy them. Moreover, either Jesus was successful in his mission to redeem humanity, or he wasn't. It simply doesn't make sense to co-opt a figure from another religion when the very claims that figure makes about himself contradict everything that Islam claims. But even Jesus himself predicted this when he said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 11, quote, many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. Remember that verse. We will return to it momentarily. So, thus far, the Muslim conception of Allah seems to be a bumbling moron who plagiarizes heretical Christian texts, contradicts himself in his own holy text, and has a prophet from another religion who deceives rather than, points people on the right path, like prophets do. He also can't get his history right with regard to Jesus, as the Quran states the complete opposite of what Christians, Jews, and pagans all agree upon regarding Jesus' crucifixion. This gets at the particular understanding that Muslims have of the Quran. This view is one that is not all that dissimilar to certain KJV-only Protestant views of the Bible, namely that the text was handed down from heaven by God himself, perfect and without error. Arabic is even considered a sacred language, and one cannot get true, authentic Islamic teaching without reading the Quran in Arabic. The issue, however, as I've clearly demonstrated, is that there are several errors in the Quran. Islam as a whole holds false views about history. The issues I've chosen to address here are merely a selection of discrepancies within the Quran. There are obviously many, many more than what I have pointed out. Now, before I wrap up my case, I believe it is also relevant to look into this so-called Prophet Muhammad. Let's do that now. In order to become a Muslim, one must say that there is no God but Allah and claim that Muhammad was his prophet. The Hadith, which are multi-volume recorded traditions of Muhammad's life by those who are close to him, is quite revealing about the actual character of Muhammad. As previously mentioned, he was tormented by an angel to write down his revelations, which became the Quran, and when the angel wasn't around, he wanted to kill himself. He beheaded boys, killed a woman in front of her 5 children, and at one point he had 7 wives. He frequently raped women and enslaved children. He married a 6-year-old named Aisha, then consummated the marriage when she was 9 and he was 52. As such, from here on out, I will refer to Muhammad as the pedophile prophet. For those unaware, there are actually Muslim debates one can find online about at what age a woman can have sex with a man precisely because of the case of Aisha. In fact, Iraq recently changed its age of consent to 9 years old, also in reference to the case with Aisha. As with my analysis of the Quran, this is not an exhaustive list of Muhammad's activities. There are literally hundreds of stories like this about him. And these are not things that I just made up out of thin air. These are from Muslim sources. In fact, I got this information from an ex-Muslim who discovered these things for himself. If one wanted to hear what that journey looked like from a Muslim's eyes, I can highly recommend the book Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus by Nabeel Qureshi. The way in which Muhammad died is also of particular interest. As multiple Muslim sources claim, the pedophile prophet was killed. So who killed him? Well, I have another great resource for everyone listening to check out, a video called Who Killed Muhammad? I'll have it linked in my sources in the description. But for the sake of this discussion, I will offer a summary here. Surah 69 verses 44 through 46 reads, quote, "Had the messenger made up something in our name, we would have certainly seized him by his right hand and then severed his aorta." This passage clearly states that Allah would kill Muhammad by severing his aorta if he made up his revelation. And for those who don't know, the aorta is the artery coming out of the heart. Just so we're clear, if the aorta is severed, the person in question will die. Tracking so far? Okay. According to these hadith, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and more, Muhammad was poisoned by a Jewish woman. This woman was seeking revenge because Muhammad killed her father, uncle, and husband. According to Sahih al-Bukhari 44:28, Aisha, Muhammad's child bride, records the pedophile prophet speaking as he is dying. Quote, "O Aisha, I still feel the pain caused by the food I ate at Khaybar, and at this time, I feel as if my aorta is being cut from that poison." It is worth mentioning that the words "as if" were added by the translator. They are not present in Arabic. This is also not the only hadith that reports this. According to Sunan Abi Dawud, quote, "He then said about the pain of which he died, I continued to feel my pain from the morsel which I had eaten at Khaybar. This is the time when it has cut off my aorta." These are not the only Muslim sources that state this fact, but personally, I think the truth is brutally clear. God has a sense of humor. Recall what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 11, quote, "Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many." In conclusion, I believe that Islam is the most obvious false religion in the world. The conception of morality offered within Islam is particularly skewed per Muhammad's lifestyle and the constant warring of Muslims with those of other religions. The Quran is incoherent, relying on heretical Christian texts and contradicting itself in several places. The so-called prophet is a murderous pedophile who, in my view, was clearly deceived by a demon, disguised as an angel of light, as St. Paul would say. In a brutal twist of fate, the true God heard Muhammad's arrogant ploys and decided to bring him to a shameful, painful end at the hand of the people he spent his whole life warring against, and in such an embarrassing way that all would know that he is the deceiver and a false prophet. While many Muslims claim to worship the same quote-unquote God, the Trinitarian God is not the simple monistic God of Islam. The character of Allah, as the Muslims conceive in their Quran, is confusing, contradictory, and deceptive. He doesn't know his history or where his theology comes from. Thus, I think we can clearly conclude that Muslims are guilty of the word concept fallacy concerning God. Allah exists, but the Muslim conception of Allah is a false one. Remember, Allah just means God in Arabic. The being Muslims call Allah is a great deceiver, one who sounds far closer to the Christian conception of Satan. Therefore, we do not believe in the same God. May the true God have mercy upon those who are deluded and bring them to the true faith and fullness that is in the Church of Jesus Christ, the Orthodox Church. If there are any Muslims listening to this, I would like to refer them to the content produced by Orthodox Shahada for further information.